All right, it is 2 o'clock and we are getting ready to start today's webinar. So welcome, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from for today's member webinar. My name is Dorina Cousins and I am the Director of Membership here at ITS America. And today's webinar, it is about unlocking federal funding. Before we get things started, I'll just go over a few logistical items. And if you notice when you entered into the webinar, all participant lines are muted, and that is to prevent any interruptions or distraction for speakers. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your toolbar, and you can use that to submit your questions, and we will ensure that we save time at the end where our speakers, they will provide you with answers to your questions. There's also a closed caption feature that you can turn on and use if you wish to do so. And lastly, this webinar, it is recorded today, and it will be available on the ITS America website. And with that said, I will now turn things over to Amy Ford. Amy?
Thank you, Dorina. I really appreciate it. And welcome to those of you who are here live and to those of you who are watching us in recording. And as we joked, perhaps in 1.5 speed up recording, we will do our best to make sure that you can listen to it in all forms and fashions. But we really appreciate those of you who came on today. And, you know, as we get going in our discussion, I think that the goal for today is to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, to be able to talk a little bit about the first year in review and what we've seen and what we've accomplished and what we know that you all have been experiencing as well. And as we get going with this, we've invited some guests and some others to join us in a conversation about how we've seen the first year, successes that we've seen in being able to tap and harness the dollars and the funds that are literally pouring through, but then also to understand that there are some tools that ITS America and AECOM are making available to our colleagues here at ITS America, and wanting to allow you all the opportunity to continue to think how we work through the complexity of what these bills were, the dollars and the funds and the resources that have been applied, and how do we tackle really leaving not one stone unturned and not $1 on the table as we get going. And so as we go through this with the participants that are here, we are going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you even in the Q&A or into the chat, to talk a little bit about your experiences and what you're seeing, the challenges, the issues, and what you're looking forward to as we unleash sort of the second year of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I wanted to start with some small introductions as we go through and talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the infrastructure and the bipartisan infrastructure, or IIJA as some call it, and you'll hear me slip back and forth. And, you know, I think when we talk about the billions of dollars that were put through in IIJA, it's important to understand sort of the variety of the categories and where we saw this work unfold. But I think that as we are looking through, you know, between the transportation side of this, to the impacts on our energy side of this, to how we've been looking at infrastructure and built environments and community building, the idea behind bipartisan infrastructure law was really to lift transportation and infrastructure funding, to encourage roles in equity and sustainability so that we have a transportation system and a built environment, a digital environment, a technology forward environment that leaves for safer and greener and frankly smarter transportation infrastructure. And as we've been working through that, I think that the interesting piece of the quantification of this first year has been really vast. And, you know, we like to talk about bipartisan infrastructure law and bill dollars in really sort of three ways. And I think that you all might be experiencing this in three ways. And I don't know about you, but I think many will ask, well, how is it that you're taking advantage of IIJA? What is it that you as a city or you as a public agency or even you as a private sector person who's working with clients on this, what is it that you have tapped? What have you harnessed in this first year? And I think we're seeing a couple of things as we look at this first year, but let me sort of group it up because I think that has always been an interesting challenge about how we describe this bill. And the way that we look at bill, I think, is in three ways. First off was the formula funding, the plus up, if you will, of the formula funds. In fact, the plus up of the formula funds was the vast majority of new funding that was funneled into infrastructure. And in some cases, and especially in transportation, almost 90% of the funds that are coming through bill are actually oriented through formula funds. But some of that is new formula programs, and we'll get into that as those new formula programs have acquired expectations of what people are looking at. The second is the discretionary grant funding. And, I think that the discretionary grant funding is easy for us to pay attention to. It's obvious. We have grants, we're competitive grant programs. We've got a lot of great examples of that. Some that existed before, like the low-no emissions grants for transit buses, to the RAISE grant, which is, the newest version of how we talked about, the build grants and others. To the smart grants that enforced, and added to new technology options, even now hydrogen hub competitions. But the third piece of what we're looking at when we talk about bill is really about the grant support and the grant programs. And I think many states and cities and others are starting to think about, and have been for this last year, looking at how do we put ourselves together? How do we actually tap these dollars? How do we put our best face forward? How do we continue to move projects and priorities that are important to us? And how does it fit into the overall structure of what's going on? And so as we look at this from a year one perspective, a couple of things that we noticed and that we saw. Number one, infrastructure spends are absolutely up. And I think people are seeing this, and these data is even just a hitch old as ARPTA, our colleagues over Buildings and Roads group, starting to put together, spends that are moving up in highway work, in airport work, even in transit work, although a little less in things like light rail. And bridge construction work is way up. So as we see this, we see these billions of dollars flowing into state budgets, into cities' budgets, especially through the formula funds, and then also coming through some of these discretionary grants. We're also seeing that we have different program requirements now to access a lot of these funds. And I think a lot of you have been very involved in this. So in order to access the dollars that are coming through from electrification and charging, you had to put together as a state a plan, and your electric vehicle infrastructure planning. In order to tap the new infrastructure and decarbonization dollars, you have to, and I think everyone is going through this right now, put together a decarbonization plan for each state to approach how we want to look at decarbonization in order to get those dollars to flow, both to the state, both to the cities and municipalities and others. But the last item has also hit us too. And the reality is that we know that the inflation that we've been experiencing for the last year has had a direct impact on programming. And for instance, in inflation and construction costs, as far as materials and our roads and others, saw a 23% increase. And so anecdotally and others, as we talk to folks at DOTs and such, what we're seeing is while the dollar spends are up, the reality of what we're able to accomplish with those dollars is being impacted in some regards, programs being a little held back, CIPs or construction, our capital improvement programs and others, not necessarily changing radically where a lot of new things are coming on because impact of inflation might have on some of that. So as we turn to a couple of the grant programs, I think that, it bears recalling and looking at what we're seeing. So almost all of the grant programs have been completed. They were launched and rolled out by US DOT, by Federal Highway Administration, even by Department of Energy and others. What we saw in that is a couple of things. Number one, that the time that it took to get some of these programs up and running, as FHWA and others had a lot of expectations to get these NOFOs out and the requirements. So that took some while. What we're also seeing is even for those awarded programs that sometimes, as it is wont to be, the contracting side of that and moving that through to get actually going on these programs, the ones that were awarded, is also taking a little bit of while. But I think it bears remembering that what we saw is a lot of new programs that really came into play. And we highlighted here a few that have had a significant impact and touch a lot of what we're seeing also in the evolution of technology and how it integrates into broader grant programming and funding. And so between the mega grants, which are massive, and our colleagues here, who are the city of Louisville, who speak here in a moment, we'll see some of this in areas like Brent Smith Bridge and others, which just received significant dollars for those programs that were just too big to fund in other ways. The efforts around reconnecting communities and how we think about not only the removal of highways and such, but also the integration of technology layers and such that really define what could be, we say, when we improve mobility and reconnect. to our Safe Streets for All, if you look at some of the programs that were allocated through that, not only was it just hard infrastructure that improved bike lanes and walkability and such, but it also had integrated technology elements to the BEAD programs. And BEAD, if you're familiar, is again the telecom and specifically the broadband and fiber programs, really about connecting and building equity into creating complete communities that are connected. To Smart and Attain, which I don't need to tell the audience here what we saw in those programs, but I think that it is important to see that as you look at programs like SMART, that what we are seeing is a mix and a raft of different kinds of programming funds that came through all the way from cities into curb and data planning, to how we look at connectivity, to how we think about integrated trip planning and transit and integration there. So there's a lot of multimodal nature to what we've seen. And I think that this year, as we move forward, that we're going to continue to see that grow. So we wanted to turn it today to a couple of colleagues in Louisville. And we have with us on the call two colleagues, specifically Jeff O'Brien, and Jeff is the chief of the Louisville Forward programs in the city of Louisville and the metro area, which combine sort of economic development and workforce development in other areas. And he's also joined by Amanda Dethridge, and Amanda Dethridge is the person who is responsible for transportation planning, supervising within the Public Works Department. And today we wanted to include just a talk about how one city and one community has really looked at IIJA and Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and taken advantage of it and really built a program that really led to some successes as they move forward. So Jeff and Amanda, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to be here, and we're greetings from Louisville, Kentucky, where it is Kentucky Derby week. So if I seem a little distracted, I apologize, but really happy to be with all of you today and talk to you about Louisville's program here with the IIJA or Bill. We generally refer to it as Bill here, but I just got to talk a little bit about how we even got on this track and working towards these programs and frankly being successful with these programs. This journey really started in 2016 when we released our Move Louisville plan, and that is our multimodal strategic transportation plan. And what this project did is it really helped to identify priority projects and priority policies that the city needed to pursue over the next 10 to 20 years. And we can move on to the next slide here. And so the program that we've been working off is this Move Louisville plan. And it's really helped us to formulate projects and get us moving in planning from a local standpoint and help us go and achieve success in the federal competitive grant realm. And so this has been our roadmap. We've been working off of this for several years now, like I said, 2016, so almost been a decade now. What happened was, as we started to see the Biden administration roll out its programs for COVID relief and infrastructure spending, we started to look at our dollars. And like many cities and other organizations in this space, we've had a lot of staff turnover and a lot of openings just because of the natural changeover in jobs and the shifting away, the great resignation, as they say. And so we've had some extra operational dollars. And so it was really the foresight of our former mayor and our former administration to come for us to go and say, hey, this money is coming down the pipe and we think we could leverage some of these dollars if we could just get organized, but we're going to need some help internally to make that happen. I think and Amanda's going to talk really about some of the specific challenges that we've been facing, but one of the big global challenges that we saw on the horizon was just the overall lack of capacity that not only our organization had, but our state transportation department and our local MPO, which is a separate organization from the city government. And so, what we were able to do is we were able to take some of our budget savings because we had vacant positions, and we entered into a contract with AECOM to help us put together a strategy to go and apply for funds. And so I think that contract was in the neighborhood of $200,000, which for the city of Louisville is a fairly large sum for us to spend on a consultant to help us put a strategy together. But what that's turned into is $44 million in funding that was come just from federal discretionary grants. And that doesn't include the additional funds that we've been successful in obtaining through our MPO, through those additional formula dollars. So I think, and I'll let Amanda really get into how we've gone through this more methodically, but what we've really done is been able to leverage our partnerships, both with AECOM, other private contractors that we have on annual contracts, and with the Accelerator for America, and just thinking about how we approach these programs from a holistic standpoint and put together a program that is not just attractive for the federal government, but it is also meeting the needs of this community. And a lot of that groundwork was laid with the plan that you have in front of you. So I encourage, if you're interested in what our Move Louisville plan says, and go check it out at www.louisvilleky.gov. And Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of talk through our programs and challenges, but that's kind of how we got started on this. And I'll let Amanda kind of fill in the details, because she's really been the workhorse on this and the lead grant writer, and done a lot of the great work that has helped us achieve that $44 million in funding. So Amanda, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So beginning in about March 2022 last year, we started hosting a series of bill strategy workshops where we created a bill team. And, this was our public works department, our planning department, our economic development, sustainability. We had our Office of Management and Budget, but we also went external and included our Louisville Water Company, Metropolitan Sewer District, and our transit agency, TARC, to try to see, what our priorities were and where our kind of top priorities overlaid with each other. So at that point, we used AECOM's Fund Navigator tool to identify both formula and discretionary grant opportunities, which we use to create what we call the project to program matrix that you see here. You can see that with a project category, estimated cost, a project description, we started to identify the targeted funding categories for each of our project ideas. And that kind of helped us narrow down two paths forward. Number one is we could tell which grants were coming that were aligned with our existing ideas. So a lot of those existing projects that we identified in that Move Louisville process, and that we knew that we were kind of ready to start implementing those ideas with a bill grant application. A good example of this was the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant last year. We knew early on that we might be a good contender for an implementation grant because we already had a safety action plan in place. But also using the project to program matrix, we were able to identify grant opportunities that were coming that we didn't already have good ideas for. So it kind of forced us to go back to our strategic goals and decide, do we want to go after this grant, and what basic groundwork do we need to work on to make us ready to actually submit an application? A good example of that for us is the charging and fueling infrastructure grant. We've heard that EVs and alternative fueling sources would be coming, but at the time of our creation of Move Louisville back in 2016, we didn't really name them a top priority. But since the IIJA or the bill has come out, it's quickly become a top priority for us. So again, making a matrix like that using the Fund Navigator tool, I think, is a great way to kind of streamline what do you need to focus on in the first year, and what kind of basic groundwork do you need to do to make you competitive for a grant application next year. Also last year, we were able to convince our mayor and Metro Council to set aside a pool of what we call the unallocated bill match funds, which we use to for local match for our bill grants. This helps us be competitive because we show that not only are we committed to providing the local match, we already have the cash in hand. Next slide, please. So this process has paid off because we had 4 successful grant applications in Bill's first year. We were the only Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation grant that was awarded in the state of Kentucky, receiving over $21 million for that project. We were one of 10 sensor projects and one of only 59 overall projects that were awarded SMART grants. Again, the only one in Kentucky. And we were also the only RAISE grant recipient in Kentucky, and we were lucky enough to receive 2, one planning grant and one construction grant for Broadway All the Way and Reimagine 9th Street projects. You might have seen those on the project program matrix earlier. But you win some and you lose some. We haven't received everything we've requested, but it's always worth throwing your hat in the ring, because if you don't go for it, the answer is always no. So we have had many challenges. One could be we have multiple ideas for one grant. We have to decide which one to apply for. Another one is deciding, do we even want to apply for this grant? Are we ready? Is this idea mature enough to go for it now, or should we wait for next year? The staff time that we need to actually write the grant application in-house, the funding needed if we decide to hire out that task. We also had a change in our mayor in January 2023. Our new mayor continues to support many of the same initiatives that our last mayor supported, but we are starting work on developing new strategic plans, so that could change our priorities. And winning the grants actually adds a different type of burden, and we're lucky. That's a great problem to have, but we've had to take a hard look at our staffing and resources and task management. We're currently advocating our leaders to hire more project managers to help us implement and deliver these projects. Also, winning kind of hurts our future competitiveness. How do we remain competitive now that we've won a few grants? So we have to be even more innovative and even more ready to make sure that our future grant applications are competitive. And we talk a lot about these discretionary programs, but we can't lose focus on some of our smaller projects or projects that might be funded with the formula programs. There's a lot of focus on the big stuff right now, but you have to balance both types of work. And of course, we've already alluded to inflation. We saw this big time with our formula funds that we received from our metropolitan planning organization. They had a call for projects last fall to distribute all of their formula funding programs over the next 5 years. We were awarded $46 million through that call for projects, but 65% of it went to cost increases for existing projects. That's $29.9 million eaten up by inflation. And that's about the value of an entire RAISE grant project for us. Next slide, please. So we're preparing to start this process all over again now that the IRA's funding opportunities are coming soon, and the second year of Bill Grant NOFOs are already being released. We're also working to improve communications with the public and our elected officials. We have one mayor, 26 Metro Council members, and numerous small cities within our merged city-county government, so we have to answer to all of them. So AECOM was also helpful in creating this capital improvements project dashboard with us so that we can communicate, one, the status of active projects, and two, what projects we're considering for future funding opportunities. And the snapshot you see here shows the project costs broken down by our Metro Council districts and whether the projects are in Justice 40 census tracts, because knowing that is key to knowing if your project is competitive for a discretionary grant. Next slide, please. Some ITS and sustainability focused initiatives we're working on include our Smart Grant win in 2023. That's the visual you're looking at here. We have 34 viaducts that separate railroads from vehicular, bicyclist, and pedestrian traffic throughout our city. But they were built over a century ago and contribute to dangerous conditions during flash floods. In 2018, we actually had a fatality occur when a motorist got stuck in a flooded viaduct. And Louisville is ranked the 12th wettest city in the United States. And we also rank very high for the risk of extreme rainfall due to climate change. So the risk of these viaducts flooding continues to get worse. So our ViaSmart project will create an IoT platform and integrate it with city services and resident engagement tools through an operating system that can alert people that there's flooding ahead and divert them to other routes. Multiple ITS and IoT edge technologies will work together to improve public safety. And we hope we can scale this technology to more than just the flooded viaduct warning systems. That back-end IoT infrastructure will serve to integrate the city's transportation systems and lay a smart foundation for decades to come with the creation of that data hub that can scale citywide. One of our next ideas is thinking about maybe we could change traffic signal timing plans in response to air quality alert days. We could put those sensors at the top of infrastructure poles. Why are traffic signals even warranted? Mainly because of volume and capacity. These are usually high traffic locations with many sources of pollution, so we could be responsive with this data hub. Our city also has a smart city strategy and strategic plan that we are working to implement. One of the first ITS projects that we implemented was a Tiger grant that was granted in 2015. It was the New Dixie Highway project, which was $35 million to improve safety and launch our first bus rapid transit route and coordinated traffic signal timing. We deployed 40 2070s on the corridor and 37 bus rapid transit stops. This project included transit signal priority and queue jump with fiber optic communications. So even though that project is complete and open, we continue to deploy 2070s very aggressively. Almost all of our major arterials have the funding to deploy that hardware upgrade. We're being super aggressive about it because we know that the robust operational benefit of having it will set us up for innovative technologies like CAVs in the future. We're also finishing up a more specific ITS implementation and master plan with the hopes that that will line us up to apply for the SMART grant again, and maybe the ATTAIN grant. And we also are working with a state on a big focus right now at a state scale is wrong way detection with advanced detections, LiDAR, and warning systems of a wrong way driver. And also we're kind of scaling it back to basics. For sustainability, we're really focusing on our Complete Street initiative right now. We're trying to make it as easy and safe as possible to navigate our city without a car. But if you do need a car, we are also working to make that sustainable than ever by focusing on EV charging stations, alternative fueling sources. We're thinking about hydrogen for our heavy duty and our transit buses, also our private fleet. Louisville is well-known as a regional economic hub for manufacturing and logistics. So we need to ensure that the private fleets that are operating in our city are supported for those cleaner fueling sources as well. All right, Jeff, I think I'm gonna throw it back to you to wrap us up. I think you can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, as I think you can see, I think we've had quite a lot of success with our approach to the bipartisan infrastructure law, the IIJA. And I think a lot of it's been due to the hard work of this team and working with our partners. And really, I think the thing I could stress most is just finding those partnerships and doing that upfront planning to make sure you're prepared as a community to go after these opportunities as they come up. And I think, as Amanda says, we do have a lot of horse trading that we do in terms of identifying what's going to be the best opportunity. But if you have any specific questions for either Amanda or I, you can see our contact information here, and we'd be happy to make contact with any other city and help out as best we can. Thank you all for having us this afternoon.
Thanks, Jeff and Amanda. And, as we transition, I'm going to transition to my colleague, Hillary Fosgard, who's going to talk a little bit, and I'll give her some time to pull up her slides. So if you want, Hillary, and we'll sort of transition to you, I'll just sort of set the stage there. But, I will have a question for Jeff and Amanda and ask them to answer that as we transition to Hillary. I think with a lot of the folks sitting here, we all think that we do a good job in putting together our grant applications, and then are surprised when we see how people read them or that kind of thing. And so if I were to ask you, what do you think was the particular key to success when you guys put together those grant applications? Was it part of the sort of holistic plan? Is it that was especially innovative? Is it really hit things like equity and sustainability? What would you say, if you had to say the one thing that you thought was the success? And then I'm going to tee it up for Hillary here. What would you say?
I would say Justice 40 has driven a lot of our successful grant applications so far. And so that is a big deal for all of these discretionary grants. And so pretty much everything that we've applied for so far has focused more than the 40% required. It's been more like 70% of the funding at least is dedicated to Justice 40 areas with our discretionary grant applications. And so equity is very key. I also think that having the unallocated bill match funding pool for local match to document, we're really putting our money where our mouth is in terms of being ready to start these projects if we win these grants. And yeah, so far everything that we've applied for has been kind of derived from that Move Louisville plan. So it also shows that there's been a publicly vetted process to build support for these projects. One of the projects, Reimagine 9th Street, we won RAISE for. We had NEPA was complete, so we can show that we are truly ready to get started. I think it's really just showing how committed you truly are and how aligned you truly are with that particular grant's merit criteria.
Yeah, it's sort of being able to match, and that really is important to be able to answer that. And folks, I'm going to put in the Q&A as you have had your experiences. If I'd love some feedback from you on the audience side about what do you think has been the touchstone of success? If you've had success in IIJA so far, what was the answer? And especially on the discretionary grant side, what was it that drove success for you? Or better yet, what was a barrier that you've seen right now in being able to tap this? But one of the things that ITS America and AECOM wanted to do was also help our members look at how we really work through understanding what is IIJA, what is Bill, how do we understand the over 500 different programs and funding sources. And part of that was leveraging technology and leveraging a tool that we built that we would like to now actually offer to members as an opportunity to be able to use as a way of looking and understanding more about what comes in, especially as we're working through years 2 through 4 through 5 and onwards as we look. And so I'm going to turn it over to Hillary to talk a little bit about Fund Navigator. And this is something that we'll be sharing a link with the tool to all of the members, both on this webinar, but then also for ITS America, something that we hope can maybe also continue to assist as we try to take advantage of these programs. But Hillary?
Great. Thanks, Amy. And thanks everyone who joined for giving us some of your time this Thursday afternoon. As Amy said, I am one of the co-developers of the Fund Navigator tool, which I'd like to share a little bit with you today. And so that's going to involve a little bit of discussion overview on why we built this tool, and then moving into a live demonstration of the tool itself, because it is an interactive tool that you access through a web link in your browser. So as part of that background, and as some of the other panelists have described, Bill and then later IRA were historic pieces of funding legislation, both in the amount of funding that was authorized and also the number of new and revised funding programs that were introduced. And in particular, all of the new number of discretionary funding programs that local and non-traditional entities could compete for at the federal level. So that's, a huge opportunity that everyone is really excited about in terms of the number of dollars that are available, but also, potentially a burden of sorts, as Amanda referenced to earlier, because you need to develop the strategy, you need to have the resources to know which programs to pursue and to actually do the work of submitting an application. And so we wanted to develop a tool that would increase the efficiency and allow people to pursue that process more effectively and with fewer resources. So as we started to delve into the details of these two bills, and we were keeping track of the new information that was constantly coming out of the federal agencies as new programs were developed and defined and notices of funding opportunity were released, we quickly realized that, yes, this was going to be a huge level of effort just, for our own company, for AECOM, to make sure that all of our folks know about the opportunities that are out there. And then even more so potentially for some of the smaller organizations across the country that are doing the same thing, keeping track of their spreadsheets and sharing them with colleagues to make sure that they don't miss out on any opportunities. So we developed this tool to help them so they aren't, on their own and reinventing the wheel, and they've got a centralized source of information to build their strategy from. So let me give you an overview of what the tool looks like and what's available now and what we're making available to ITSA members after this webinar. So this image that I'm sharing now is an overview of the different components of the Fund Navigator suite of tools. And there are two components that are live and being used now. And that is the FundExplorer and the FundMatcher. And so the FundExplorer is that one-stop shop of information about the funding programs that we update on a weekly basis as new information becomes available or new funding opportunities are released. And we have enhanced that database with filters and search features and links to the relevant federal websites to gather additional, more detailed information. Anything that we could do to make it easier for people to find information about the funding programs in Bill and IRA, and so that they could, reduce the amount of time they need to spend on that effort. So, but even then, as Amy referenced, across the two pieces of funding legislation, we're talking like over 500 different programs and subprograms. So that's a lot to wade through. And so we wanted to move on to the next phase, which was developing FundMatcher, which is essentially an automated screening process where we input information about your projects. It goes through an AI scoring bot to compare that with the different funding programs and give you a prioritized list that you can review to come to a final decision on which funding programs to pursue. So I'll talk a little bit more about the FundMatcher part later. I want to start with showing you the FundExplorer itself, and that's the one that will be giving open access to ITSA members after today's call. So let me navigate to the browser. So this is the landing page for that FundExplorer access, and we'll be sending a registration form that you guys can fill out, and you'll get a link to this site. As you come in, you can click on one of the buttons at the top of the diagram here to access the FundExplorer searchable website itself. And of course, my browser is a little sleepy because I was listening to Jeff and Amanda talk, so it's waking up. But the way that this works is that we have on the screen a parent table with all of the different funding programs within those two pieces of legislation here at the top. We've got a number of filter panels over here to the right, and then the bottom portion of the screen is what populates with an individual program's information as soon as you click on a row in the upper table. So you can scan through this table, click on a row, and then, as I said, this bottom portion will populate with the, oh, sorry, I clicked on the wrong button there. It will populate with the details of that funding program. So we've got description, eligible uses. This is the text descriptions that are also used in the FundMatcher bot to make to create the scoring, the amount of funding that's available from the different sources of legislation over the 5 years, information about who the recipients are, whether it's a pass-through program, the different categories and requirements in terms of location. But as we said, there's a lot of programs and no one is going to click through every row in this master table. So they can use one of these filters to the right to, say, okay, I just want to look at EV related programs and I'm only interested in investigating the competitive grants. Lots of folks want to use this tool to find out about those grant programs that they would actually need to actively pursue. So as they do this, now you've got a much shorter list of programs that you can look through. And this one I also wanted to call out because it is an example of a competitive grant, because I wanted to call out some of the additional information related to the notices of funding opportunity that you can find within FundExplorer. So the parent table will show you a summary of the kind of next relevant or most recent relevant due date of a notice of funding application, but the user can also scale down here and open the secondary page of this subprogram's information and gather more information about the history of NOFO's for a program. So for this example here, there have been 2 notices of funding opportunity for the low-no emission bus grants, one in 2022 and one in 23. We can see the amount of funding for each year, details about the local match requirements or any other notes that we've entered, as well as the history of when those, what dates those NOFOs were released and what the due dates were. So if it's the case that, the NOFO for this fiscal year has already passed, you can use this sort of information to start gauge, okay, what's the rough timeline of when we could expect it to come out in the coming fiscal year. Additionally, we've got NOFO URLs that will, as the user clicks on them, will take them directly to the grants.gov website. Again, my internet browser is being a little bit slow, but it'll come up eventually. So here they can access the actual PDF of the NOFO itself. In addition to those NOFO links for competitive programs, we've also got links that will take the user to the federal website to get more information about that particular funding program, either the agency's website or the SAM link. So, so that's an example of one way it could be used. I want to call out in particular an additional filter that we've added courtesy of ITSA. ITSA put out a report when Bill came out about the different technology categories and programs that were of interest to ITSA members. And so we've included that as different technology categories as a filter within this interface. So let me clear out of that one, and let's take an example of, say, smart infrastructure here. And as we click on a row in this table, we can see, again, that ITSA category that it has been applied to. And there's also some notes there, so you can get a better sense of what the details of that assignment were. So all of that, again, with the idea of helping you to stay on top of the programs that are of interest to you. I think the last feature I'll kind of point out here is that you can sort by this NOFO date and bring up the ones that are kind of most in the future. And so this can be a way for you to just really zoom in on, what's coming immediately down the pike. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to show for the ITSA FundExplorer access that we're giving participants of this webinar and other ITSA members access to. But I also want to point out a little bit of what's involved in the FundMatcher program, because that's what we used in our engagement with the city of Louisville to help to create that prioritized list of programs for them to pursue. So let me navigate over to that interface right now so I can show you a little bit about that. We because the Fund Navigator is it is based on the user's actual project parameters and description and location. So it's not something that we can give everyone access to because it is very much tailored to an organization's projects, but we can demonstrate how it was used in the case of the City of Louisville. So again, the FundMatcher is an automated screening process where we have that AI bot to basically project description that is uploaded, and then compare that against the description and eligible uses for all of the different funding programs in IIJA and IRA, and use that to create a prioritized list that the user can more efficiently review. You're looking at a short list of maybe, a dozen or 20 programs instead of all 500 programs, and then get to that decision of, okay, these are the 1, 2, or 3 programs that we actually want to pursue for a given project and write that grant application for. So when the user comes into this interface, and again, I'm using the City of Louisville as an example here, we've got about 50 projects in the portfolio of projects that were uploaded. Each project has a basic description, and I'll just point to the one that, one of the ones that Amanda had in her matrix earlier. We've got a project description and location, and we can see in this row here in the table, the number of quote unquote A matches. These are the targeted funding programs that were identified within the tool. And also a note that it's been tested in the Justice 40 preliminary screening process, and it returns that there are disadvantaged communities present in the impact area. So when we want to actually look at what those matches look like in more detail, we just filter on that project and go to the match details page, where the information about the project is repeated. And we see this table here, which is a ranked prioritized list of the funding programs that are most likely to be suitable for a given project. And the scoring here, we've made it similar to like a GPA GPA scale from school. So the A's are the targeted funding programs that have been identified. So a human has reviewed those and said, click yes, we want to put this on a short list of funding programs to potentially pursue. And then the ones that are below that, that is the output of the bot, where it's doing that text comparison using a natural language processing algorithm, as well as checking to see which of the hierarchical filters it passes in terms of, is it the right recipient type? Is it in the right geographic location? If there are locational requirements, is it the right type of infrastructure for a given funding program? So the user can come in, click on a row in the table, for programs that they want to review. Again, look at all of the details. It's the same basic information that's in the FundMatcher, and make that decision on whether that's a funding program that they want to pursue for that project, and then click on this link here, which will open another browser window, where we carry out that tagging process. So that is an overview of how this works. It's got the same categories and other filters over here to the right. So if you want to reduce the number of results to return, again, to things like I only want to look at competitive grants or non-competitive grants and so forth, you can apply all that there. And once the user has finished this process of going through each of their funding programs, going through each of their projects and deciding which funding programs to pursue, so they've got this list here, they can then export the results out of the tool by coming to this page here and just kick out an Excel spreadsheet, which will summarize the projects, the funding programs that were targeted, and some relevant information and links related to those funding programs. So I think the last thing that I'll mention here is that we do have the preliminary Justice 40 screening, which is based on the CJIS tool that the White House has put out. And so we take a lat long and impact area for each of these projects. We run it through that geospatial analytics tool, and it will return the results identifying what share and number of people within the impact area are in census tracts that are identified disadvantaged communities, how many of the different criteria of disadvantaged communities that population meets. So as I click on example for the Broadway study again, and as I hover over that, we should be able to see again across those 8 different criteria within the tool, how many of them are met. And only one of the criteria needs to be met for it to be identified as a disadvantaged community. So this is, likely there will need to be a more robust analysis done in the grant application itself, but this can be useful as an initial screening to think about whether a project is likely to meet the requirements of the Justice 40 program prior to getting into the application phase itself. So I think that is most of what I want to include here. I did want to mention that, again, we can't really share the FundMatcher with everyone without having more conversations in a relationship about what sort of projects you want to pursue funding for. But we do have in the ITSA page, we've got some details of what FundMatcher is all about. We have a video and a brochure and a little bit of information about what a package might look like if you wanted to upload a batch of your projects, get that preliminary screening, and have for example, a strategy workshop with some of our grants experts to do similar to what City of Louisville did in developing their grant strategy. So with that, well, I think that I've actually got one more thing, which is how we will be giving access to that, which I'm just going to summarize briefly here, that we will send out that email with a link to a registration form like what you see here, where you can just enter your information, and we will email you a link to the FundExplorer dashboard so you can try it out for yourself. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Thanks, Hillary. And, as you were talking, we had a few questions come in. We had some folks responding on the chat to some of my questions, and I was going to follow up with Abby on some of these. But before I did that, and Hillary and Amanda, feel free to come on live as we go. And we did have one person ask about what is Justice 40, and I know Amanda has answered it in the question and answer in the Q&A. But Amanda, if you just wanted to talk just briefly about that and how you all saw that too within Louisville, about what that really meant in your community.
Absolutely. So one of our projects, Reimagine Ninth Street, was really powerful because Ninth Street is kind of the edge of our central business district, our downtown, and immediately adjacent to that on the other side of Ninth Street are historically Black neighborhoods. And they are also historically some of the oldest infrastructure in our city. So the infrastructure is aging, and these communities have been historically underserved. And so we wanted to, that rose to the top of one of our priority projects as we wanted to kind of redo Ninth Street to bring the central business district and the downtown together more cohesively with the neighborhoods just to the west of there. And so that was probably one of our first big equity projects that through the Justice 40 initiative, of supporting that Justice 40 initiative. But we've quickly learned how important Justice 40 is in terms of the discretionary grants and meeting the merit criteria. U.S. Department of Transportation has a goal of spending at least 40% of their funding, or having a 40% of the benefits of their funding benefit these types of communities that have seen historical, been disadvantaged historically. And so I think the more, if 40% is the minimum, I think, to even be competitive for a discretionary grant right now. But the more that you are spending in these areas, I think the more competitive you will be. So if you have a roadway corridor that is entirely inside of one of those Justice 40 census tracts, then 100% of the project would benefit those types of communities. And I think that would make it highly competitive from a discretionary grant perspective.
Thank you so much. And, I think it's a really interesting piece, and not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that many are seeing that when we are talking about Bill, and we're talking especially about the discretionary grant programs, I think we've all seen it, but if you are not addressing issues of equity, and if you are not addressing issues of sustainability, the very likelihood that your program is going to move forward in the discretionary grant program is slimmer. How about that? And that's a very blunt statement, but I think it's really important to understand and be able to quantify that. And it is just not applicable to to urban areas per se. Also, Justice 40 has connotation, especially across rural. And to that end, I wanted to ask, and I'm putting Abby on the spot a little bit. Abby was kind enough to put a comment in the chat about some challenges they have as a regional organization for small rural communities and how to move into planning for the bill, understanding about what the grants are and how they actually apply to pulling their communities together. And Abby, we were going to unmute you if you were okay and comfortable with this and ask you to expand just a little bit on that. As you're looking at these challenges, is it time, is it resources, is it consolidation around a single project that really makes some sense? And I hoped maybe you could share a little bit, as I think some others might experience some of the same things that you are.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I apologize for any noise going on in the background. I wasn't expecting to speak, and we have some house.
I know, I'm totally putting you on the spot, and we can't hear the noise, so you're all good to go.
Okay, good. So yeah, it's a lot of things. So my organization covers 6 counties and about 54 municipalities in that, and they're all very small. So I guess part of the problem is it would be very nice for us to do a plan similar to what Louisville did, but we kind of work in a we need this done right now, and a lot of the funding that's coming out is for stuff that wasn't necessarily a priority before we started seeing the funding coming out. And then once it started coming out, we're like, oh, we want to get on top of this while we've got the money for it. But unfortunately, because of that, we didn't have a plan ahead of time. We still want to jump on it, but with only 2 months at the most for a lot of these grants, it's really hard to then get all these municipalities on board. So yes, some of it is our issue on not thinking ahead as much, but things like EV chargers, things like, I didn't even know about Zero Vision until the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant came out. And now I feel like I'm an expert on it because of applying for that grant. But a lot of it's stuff we haven't considered in the future and didn't have a plan for. And now we've got, 2 months to become experts and write a grant. So that's kind of where our issues are coming in.
Yeah, and I think that we see this, and I think a lot of communities are seeing this as we go around, and even Louisville, I think, had this experience, Amanda, where you may also have your planned list, and then it really it can quickly shift depending on where the priorities are coming in from the discretionary funds. And it's not to suggest that we all just chase the money, but sometimes, you take opportunity in hand and look to secure that. And certainly on the rural side, I think that, we all understand and know that a big piece to this is about equity and funding and ensuring that dollars are moving into our rural communities from connectivity, from safety, from equity, and otherwise. And I think that, and Abby, one of the reasons that we wanted to share the Fund Navigator tool also is to try to harness a little bit of the opportunity to understand really what's out there. It is darn hard to keep up with 500 different kinds of programs, to understand where they are, what the applicability might be to you. And so the ability to go in and just do small word searches, understanding, hey, if you have a project that's looking at, a Main Street or a complete streets kind of program, which programs really are addressed to be able to tackle that? Or if you're looking to see something about, connectivity and first mile, last mile connectivity from a fiber broadband perspective, which ones are really going there? And that was some of why we wanted to share this tool. And, we got a little delayed in IITS and us launching this out to the membership, but wanting to be able to provide some of that. And actually, Tom, you asked a question about who the main users were targeted by this, and Hillary or Aaron, I know you're on the call, but if you wanted to answer that, and what we were also thinking about in our collaboration with ITS America, but Hillary?
Sure, I can take that. So I guess the broad answer is anyone who is planning to pursue or receive federal funding. So pretty much everyone. I mean, as I said at the beginning, when we were first developing the tool, we're really kind of focused on the more local organizations, so municipalities or NPOs or counties that they may not have a grants department to stay on top of this or to really spend the time to develop the strategy. And so we were initially seeking, to focus more on those. But, we've also had interest from, state DOTs and departments where they're interested in, speaking to what Abby was referencing earlier, when they need to manage multiple different jurisdictions that are underneath them and have some level of coordination on, which project in which municipality or which area would be, the best fit to go after a given grant, to make sure that they aren't, sort of compete against themselves. So I think that there's a lot of different folks that could benefit from the tool, and that's just a couple of examples.
And going back to ITS America, part of the programming that we talked about with them is, wanting to offer this as a benefit of membership, frankly, the access at least to the FundExplorer elements that allow us to go in and to be able to tap this. And I recognize that, as we all sort of came up to speed in this first year, there was more yet to come up to speed. NOFOs, changes and small changes in the criteria, and NOFOs are coming back out, especially on the discretionary funds. Some of those programs that you may have put in for before, that maybe you have a project also that could be applicable to another discretionary program. Recognizing, and I'll tell you some comments that we are certainly hearing from our federal partners, is that we're not yet quite tackling everything. And a comment that was made was that smaller cities, communities, and others, there's a great opportunity for access to resources. And as you noted, Abby, I think, just being able to tap it, to be prepared, and to be really understand how to effectively go after these funds. And that sounds so crass, but the reality is that's what it's there for. I know the federal government is keen on moving these dollars out and not leaving them sitting on the table either. And so really being able to build those programs together. And Abby, you followed up in the chat with saying, that we have no grants department in the organization. And so that is some of the intent here. And again, now with the lens, if you will, of the technology side of this, obviously the goal of ITS America is to be able to move to the safer and greener and smarter transportation system, and understanding the lap and the nuances between these programs, I think is really critically important. And so, as I close this out in the last second, Amanda, I wanted to ask just one final question. And I think that, if you all were offering any insights and any advice to organizations or organizations like Abby, what would you say would be the one thing that you think that people should not leave on the table in regards to how they do this work as they go through it?
Sure. So I know it's easier said than done, especially in smaller rural communities, but thinking about the processes that you have in place, if you don't have a grant department or a grant writer on your team, can you set aside a little bit of funding to maybe have an on-call contract for a grant writer whenever a NOFO comes out that you're interested in going after? Something about having a big plan like Move Louisville can be hard for smaller communities. And so you don't have to go that big with it, but maybe just kind of strategizing what are your main goals? What are your main goals that you want to go after, and which NOFOs are out there that kind of match your main goals? And starting that public engagement process to get support for at least one or two big projects, big goals that you really want to go after. And lastly, I think I would just any kind of training or webinars, newsletters that you can sign up for just to get yourself informed. It's not the most exciting training, but I think the National Highway Institute offered a training. I think it was called Understanding the Uniform Guidance Requirements for Federal Awards. That was really great at training you up on all of the how to apply for federal grants, how to administer federal grants. And so if you're serious about wanting to go after these, I would recommend that training.
Thanks, Amanda. And that title right there is probably why no one has tapped into that training. No. And, the last question that we just received from Talis is getting access to this tool. And so we will be following up this webinar with an email out to all of the people who signed up and registered for the webinar that will have a link to the registration so you can get into the tool. And then actually we'll be following up and doing that for all ITS members. But we just wanted to say thank you so very much to all of you who joined the call today. Thank you to our guests, to Amanda and to Jeff, who joined us, and to Hillary. And thank you for ITS America as we all joining together to host this. This really is about how we harness everyone's capacity to make sure that that we really do build this system and this transportation system that can lead to this safer and greener and smarter future. So thank you so much for your time, and we will see you on the flip side of our Fund Navigator. Take care.